The sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil, turning the dry earth into a bed of cracked bones. Poker Alice shifted the weight of the water pail against her hip, feeling the sun scorch her already burnt skin through the thin cotton of her dress. The hem brushed against the parched grass, stirring up little clouds of dust with each heavy step. The spring was nearly dry. She'd known it before she left the cabin, but hope had a cruel way of tugging a body forward, even when common sense screamed to stay put. The world stretched around her, endless, empty, punishing. The only sounds were the scratch of the wind and the faint buzz of unseen insects gnawing at the silence. Halfway back, she spotted him. At first, she thought it was an animal, something dragged low and broken across the ground. But as she drew closer, a shape took form. A man sprawled face down in the dirt, his skin darker than any settler she'd ever known, his chest barely rising. His clothes were torn and stained with blood, dust caking his black hair. An arrow shaft protruded from his thigh, snapped in half. Poker Alice froze, her breath hitched in her throat. A Navajo, her father's voice rang loud in her memory. "You see one out here alone. He's the bait. Others won't be far behind." Logic begged her to back away, to turn, to run. Instead, she moved closer. The smell hit her first. Coppery blood, sweat baked by the sun, a sour tang of fear. His lips were cracked, his tongue dry and stuck to the roof of his mouth. His body was no threat. Not now. Not like this. Still, her hands trembled as she knelt beside him. "You got no right being here," she whispered, as if words could shield her from consequence. Poker Alice dipped her fingers into the warm water she carried and dribbled a few drops onto his lips. He flinched at the touch, a soft groan rising from his battered chest. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. "Don't you dare die after I walked all this way," she muttered under her breath, pulling the scarf from her neck. She tore a strip and pressed it against the worst of his wounds, wincing as she worked. The desert stretched wide and empty around them, but Poker Alice knew better than to trust its silence. She had minutes, maybe less, before someone or something noticed the buzzard circling. "Lord help me," she gritted. "I'm going to regret this." Her legs itched from dragging him across the uneven ground, muscles screaming protest. She made it to the sparse cover of scrub near the path, then paused, chest heaving. Her cabin was still a good mile off. No way she'd make it, carrying him the whole way. The man stirred, his voice a low rasp. "Water," he croaked. "Already gave you some," she snapped, half panicked, half furious at herself for this stupidity. Ain't no sense in asking for what's running out. But she tipped the pail again, letting him sip from her cupped hand. His mouth moved in a word she didn't understand. Not English, not Spanish either. Maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. The sky darkened slightly, a thin shadow passing over them. Poker Alice's heart dropped into her boots. She looked up, just a hawk riding the thermals, but the message was clear enough. Predators circled the weak. She made the decision before she could talk herself out of it. Bracing her shoulders under his weight, she hauled him upright, one step, then another, nearly buckling under the strain. The cabin came into view at last, a squat weathered thing stitched together with stubbornness and prayers. Smoke rose from the chimney, a thin, tired ribbon. Inside, she kicked open the trapdoor to the root cellar and lowered him into the cool darkness. He moaned as she jostled him, but she didn't stop until he was hidden below. She yanked a dusty quilt over him for warmth, then closed the door, the wood thudding hollowly. Only then did she allow herself to collapse against the wall, gasping. Sweat dripped into her eyes, stinging. Her hands were raw, scraped from the rough fabric of his clothes and the splinters of the cellar door. Her heart hadn't stopped racing since she first saw him. The sun dipped lower. Long shadows crept over the land like reaching fingers. Poker Alice loaded her old rifle, the one her father left her, and sat by the window, peering out into the dying light. Every gust of wind, every creak of a branch, set her nerves jangling like a wire about to snap. She whispered under her breath, "You better live, Navajo, otherwise I'll be haunting you on the other side." She didn't know when sleep took her. One minute, she was staring out at the emptiness. The next, a sound woke her, a low, rumbling vibration that hummed through the floorboards. She sat up fast, heart lurching. Through the narrow crack in the door, she saw them. A line of horsemen emerging from the dust like ghosts, feathers in their hair, spears and rifles cradled loosely in their arms, silent and terrible as the judgment day itself. At least a dozen. They spread out around the cabin, a slow, deliberate circle. The horses stomped restlessly, snorting clouds of breath into the cool dawn air. The men said nothing. They didn't need to. The message was clear enough. We know he's here. We've come for him. Poker Alice's throat tightened until she could barely swallow. Her fingers tightened around the rifle stock. She could bolt the door, fire a few rounds, maybe take one of them down before they overran her. Or she could walk out there alone and pray she didn't die for a kindness. You did this, Poker, she thought bitterly. You gave water to a dying man, and now death's come looking for you too. She forced herself to her feet, legs shaking. A figure dismounted from the lead horse, taller than the others, face painted in stark colors, eyes like black glass. He stood there waiting. The air felt thick, heavy with dust and something older, something wild and ancient that had ruled this land long before any white man had ever dreamed of crossing it. Poker Alice drew a slow breath, feeling the dry, cracked air scrape her lungs. Then she opened the door. The sunrise behind her turned her silhouette into a flickering shadow against the worn planks of the cabin. Her rifle hung heavy in her hands, but she kept the barrel pointed down. No sense starting a fight she couldn't win. The leader watched her unmoving. Poker Alice's voice was rough, cracked from fear and dust. I ain't looking for trouble, she said, but if you mean to bring it, best know I'll stand my ground. The warrior said nothing. He lifted one hand, palm out, fingers spread, a gesture she didn't recognize, but it didn't feel hostile. Behind her in the cellar, the wounded man shifted, groaning faintly. Every pair of eyes snapped toward the sound. Poker Alice gritted her teeth. No use hiding it now. You want him, she said, stepping forward, daring herself to match the weight of their stares. You better listen first. He was dying when I found him. Would have been buzzarded meat without me. Still silence. She could feel their judgment heavy as iron chains. Poker Alice squared her shoulders. I'm willing to hand him over, but not till I know he ain't going to die just 'cause I pulled that arrow out. The leader's dark eyes narrowed. A low murmur passed among the warriors, almost like a river running under the sand. Then the leader nodded once, sharp, decisive. Poker Alice let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. But deep in her gut, the fear didn't ease, not even a little. Because out here in the dust and blood, mercy was just another kind of gamble, and Poker Alice had just laid her life on the table. The cold dawn wind slid over Poker Alice's skin, raising goosebumps even under her heavy coat. She stood in the dirt outside her cabin, rifle loose in her hands, facing a dozen mounted warriors who said nothing, did nothing except wait. The man at their head watched her like a hawk sizing up a wounded rabbit. His face was painted in stripes of white and red, and across his chest hung a necklace made of polished bone. He was lean, hardened, and utterly still. Only the dark glint of his eyes betrayed the life inside him, sharp, calculating. Behind Poker Alice, the wounded Navajo groaned again, muffled under the floorboards. If they hadn't heard it the first time, they heard it now. The lead warrior dismounted with a slow, deliberate grace. He stood a head taller than Poker Alice, his presence pressing against her like a rising tide. A single word escaped his lips, rough and clipped. Brother Poker Alice tightened her grip on the rifle. Every nerve screamed at her to run, but she knew better. Out here, showing fear was as good as bleeding in shark water. I found him dying, she said, pitching her voice low and steady. I gave him water. I pulled out the arrow. He ain't dead yet. The leader's gaze flickered to her rifle, then back to her face. Slowly he lowered his hand, palm outward, signaling his men to hold. A tall warrior with a weathered face and feathers in his braid rode forward, speaking in a language Poker Alice didn't know. The leader listened, nodded once, then turned his full attention back to her. You, good woman, he said, voice rough as gravel, but he is ours. Poker Alice swallowed. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought they might crack. "You'll take care of him?" she asked, voice hitching despite herself. The leader didn't blink. "He is blood. Blood does not leave blood behind." Something in his tone, the fierceness, the pride, sent a shiver down her spine. It reminded her of how her father used to talk about family before the fever took him. Behind the warrior's movement caught her eye. A second group, about 6 settlers on horseback, approached from the direction of town, dust plumed behind them, guns slung across their saddles. Poker Alice's stomach dropped. The settlers had seen the Navajo riders, too, and unlike Poker Alice, they wouldn't bother with words first. She turned back to the leader. "Listen to me," she said urgently, stepping closer. The warriors shifted, murmuring, hands brushing the hilts of their knives. The leader held up a hand, silencing them. "You got trouble coming." Poker Alice said, "Those men, they won't ask questions. They'll shoot first." The leader's jaw tightened. His hand dropped to the tomahawk hanging from his belt. Poker Alice hesitated, then did the only reckless, stupid thing she could think of. She shoved the rifle into his hands. His brow furrowed as he took it automatically, as if insulted and impressed at once. "You need it more than me," Pokerali said, voice shaking, "but we ain't got to fight if we don't have to." A low rumble of hooves filled the air. The settlers were close now, maybe a minute out. Shouts drifted across the dry plain. "There's engines at Boone's place." "I see them. Load up, boys." Pokerali spun, heart pounding. 6 men, rifles raised, galloping fast. Dust clouded the horizon behind them, turning the rising sun into a blood-red smear. She turned back to the Navajo. "You want to live," she snapped. "We fight together or we all die alone." For a moment, time hung frozen. Then the leader smiled, a slow, grim thing, and handed the rifle back. "You fight good," he said simply. Poker Alice racked around into the chamber. "I sure hope so." The Navajo melted into cover like smoke, slipping behind rocks and the low rise of the land, moving with a speed and silence that made Poker Alice's skin prickle. Poker Alice dashed for the side of the cabin, dropping to one knee. Her hands trembled, but she pressed the butt of the rifle into her shoulder, forcing the fear down. Settlers thundered in, pulling up hard dust swirling around their horse legs. Their leader, a wide man with a red face and a battered shotgun, bellowed at her. "Boom, get inside now. We'll handle this." Poker Alice rose slowly, rifle pointed down but ready. "They ain't here to fight," she called back. "Let them take their wounded and go." The settlers laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Yuggen's soft boon. "They're just waiting to scalp soon as our backs are turned." A shot rang out, a warning round into the dirt by her feet. Poker Alice flinched but stood her ground. "Move aside, woman," the leader barked. "Ain't no place for traitors in this valley." Another shot cracked from behind her, not at the settlers, but into the air, a sharp report that echoed across the plain. The Navajo made their presence known, rifles gleaming in the morning sun. They outnumbered the settlers, but not by much. It was about to turn ugly fast. "Don't be a damn fool," Poker Alice shouted. "You start this fight, nobody's going to see tomorrow." But fear ruled men's hearts quicker than reason. One of the settlers, a twitchy young man barely out of boyhood, jerked his rifle up, eyes wide and wild. The leader shouted, "Hold your fire." "Too late?" The boy squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, but it was enough. The valley exploded into noise. Gunfire roared. Horses screamed. Dust boiled up around them, blinding Poker Alice as she hit the ground, rolling toward the shelter of the woodpile. Bullets tore splinters from the cabin wall above her head. She fired back instinctively, not aiming to kill, just to drive them back. The Navajo warriors moved like wolves, swift and coordinated, flanking the settlers with frightening precision. Poker Alice caught a glimpse of the young settler tumbling from his horse, clutching his shoulder. Another settler's horse bolted riderless. The leader, red faced and cursing, tried to rally his men, but panic spread faster than fire in a dry barn. One by one, the settlers turned tail and fled, pounding back toward town. Their courage scattered to the wind. Silence fell, broken only by the labored breathing of the horses and the distant rattle of retreat. Poker Alice lay still for a moment, heart hammering, ears ringing. Slowly she rose. The Navajo leader approached, a shallow cut bleeding from his temple, where a bullet had grazed him. He carried himself with the easy grace of a man who expected death but didn't fear it. He stopped a few paces from her, studying her like she was a puzzle with no right answer. "You fight brave," he said. Poker Alice gave a half laugh, half cough. "Ain't brave, just stupid." A ghost of a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. One of the other warriors called out in their tongue, pointing toward the wounded man hidden in the cellar. Poker Alice followed, heart-twisting. The young Navajo she'd saved was awake, blinking groggy, pain etched deep into his features. His brother, or maybe his blood brother, knelt beside him, speaking softly. Poker Alice watched, feeling something shift inside her, something deep and old as the land itself. She had crossed the line today. There was no going back to town now, no easy life waiting with the other settlers. Even if she lived through this, she would always be a traitor in their eyes. But looking at the wounded man's hand closing around his brother's wrist, seeing the life she'd helped save, Poker Alice felt a fierce, stubborn pride swell inside her. The Navajo leader turned to her. "You have no home here now," he said, but not unkindly, simply stating fact. Poker nodded. "Never." "Really did." He studied her for a long moment, then gestured toward the wide, empty land stretching beyond the valley. "Come," he said, "with us." It wasn't an order, it wasn't a plea, was an offer. Poker Alice looked back once at her cabin. The broken shutters, the bullet holes, the familiar worn shape of it against the rising sun. Home had never been four walls and a roof. Home was where you stood your ground, where you chose who to fight for. She slung her rifle over her shoulder and stepped forward without hesitation. The warriors parted silently to let her pass, as she mounted a spare horse and rode out with them into the golden light. Poker Alice knew she wasn't running away. She was finally riding towards something worth fighting for. The smoke rose behind them, a black smear against the pale sky, marking the place Poker Alice used to call home. Her horse picked its way carefully across the broken ground, following the others in a tight line. Each hoof step stirred little clouds of dust, the rhythm steady, almost hypnotic. The Navajo warriors moved with silent urgency, never looking back. Poker Alice kept her head high, refusing to glance over her shoulder, though her heart etched what was left behind was ashes. She needed to remember that. Chayton, the tall warrior who had first spoken to her, rode slightly ahead, scanning the horizon. His presence was a steady weight beside her, like a stone in a rushing river. She didn't know what he thought of her, this pale-skinned woman dragging trouble behind her, but he hadn't pushed her away yet. That was something. The wounded man she had saved, Chayton's younger brother named Taza, rode slumped between two older warriors, his face pale, teeth clenched against the pain. Poker Alice caught his gaze once. He didn't smile, but he dipped his head slightly, a gesture of thanks. It warmed her more than the rising sun. Ahead, the land cracked open into a series of rocky gullies and hidden ravines. Good country for hiding and for fighting if it came to that. The group slowed, pulling into a hollow ring with low stone outcrops. Chayton dismounted, speaking quietly to his men. Poker Alice slid from her horse, knees buckling a little from exhaustion, but she stayed upright. Pride stitched her spine straight. They needed to rest, needed to plan. Poker Alice knew it as sure as she knew her own name. Trouble didn't just burn out with a cabin. It followed like a bloodhound on a set. One of the warriors, a grizzled man with a scar across his cheek, passed her a canteen without a word. Poker Alice took it, nodding her thanks, and drank deep. The water was lukewarm and tasted of leather, but it might as well have been the finest wine. Chayton approached, rifle slung across his back, arms crossed. He studied her with the same measuring look he had when they first met. "You fight settlers," he said, as if trying to piece her together. Poker Alice wiped her mouth and shrugged. "Fought men who'd kill anyone they didn't understand." "Seems fair," he grunted, a sound halfway between amusement and disbelief. "You leave your world," he said. "Now you have no world." It wasn't cruelty, just truth. Poker Alice let out a low breath, feeling the weight of it settle on her shoulders. She thought of the little church in town. Whispering women, the way men spat at her father for marrying a half-Mexican woman before he died. She thought of the narrow, pinched faces staring at her from behind curtained windows. "I didn't belong to that world," she said simply. Chayton's lips twitched. the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him yet. Then his face turned grim. "More settlers will come," he said. "Guns fire." He glanced at the wounded Taza, then back at Poker Alice. "They want war." Poker Alice's jaw tightened. "Then we give him one they won't forget." Across the hollow, warriors began preparing, checking rifles, sharpening blades, binding wounds. Poker Alice watched, feeling a strange, fierce energy rise inside her. She was no warrior. She was a woman who had learned to skin a deer, to shoot straight, to mend her own clothes with bleeding fingers. But out here, survival was all that mattered. Skills she thought worthless became weapons. Smoke drifted on the breeze, not from the fire they'd left behind, but fresh. Too much to be from a cooking fire. Poker Alice's got twisted. Chayton saw it too. His body went tense. "They come," he said. There was no time for grand speeches, no time for plans drawn in the dirt. The warriors moved like a single creature, fluid and deadly. Poker Alice grabbed her rifle, heart hammering, and followed them into the rocks. The settlers came on horseback, a dozen strong, kicking up dust clouds behind them. Barton Clay led them, his red face twisted with anger, a battered rifle resting easy across his saddle. Poker Alice crouched behind a boulder, pressing her back against the stone. Her palms sweated against the rough wood of the rifle. The world shrank to the beat of her heart, and the feel of the earth trembling under the hooves. A signal passed silently among the Navajo. A hand gesture, a nod. Poker Alice watched, absorbing it without understanding the language, but somehow knowing the meaning. Wait. The settlers thundered into the hollow, shouting curses and threats. Chayton stepped out first, rifle held high, empty hands open. An offer, a chance to walk away. Barton Clay spat into the dust. "You hiding behind savage now, Boone," he bellowed. "You always were too soft to survive." Poker Alice rose from cover, rifle steady. Her voice rang across the hollow, clear and sharp. "Turn back, Clay, you ain't wanted here." A ripple of laughter broke among the settlers. "You think you can scare us, girl?" Barton sneered. "You're alone." Chayton's warriors rose as one, stepping into view. Shadows among the rocks, rifles gleaming. Barton's face lost a little color. "Last chance," Poker Alice said, leveling her rifle. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Barton Clay did what cowards always do. He acted out of fear. He fired. The shot went wide, but it shattered the fragile line between talk and blood. Rifles cracked, thunder rolling through the hollow. Horses screamed and bolted. Settlers dived for cover behind rocks. Dust and gunpowder choked the air. Poker Alice squeezed the trigger. A settler yelped and dropped his rifle, clutching his bleeding hand. Bullets winded past her ear. She ducked, reloaded, fired again. Chayton moved like smoke, swift and merciless. A settler charged him with a hatchet. Chayton sidestepped and dropped him with the butt of his rifle. Poker Alice crawled behind a fallen log, firing its shapes in the dust. A bullet grazed her arm, burning hot. She bit down a cry, gritting her teeth. Across the field, she spotted Barton Clay trying to rally his men, waving them forward like a drunken general. Poker Alice lined up the shot. Barton spotted her too late. Her bullet punched through the brim of his hat, sending it spinning into the dirt. Barton dropped flat, crawling for cover. The settlers' courage broke. They fled, scrambling onto their horses, dragging the wounded behind them. Poker Alice lowered her rifle slowly, chest heaving. The silence after the battle was thicker than the gun smoke. Bodies littered the ground, settlers and horses alike. Poker Alice stood slowly, blood trickling down her arm, watching the survivors disappear over the ridge. Chayton approached, his face unreadable. "You fight good," he said again, but this time there was respect in his voice. Poker Alice looked around at the battered, bloody survivors standing with her. Her chest etched with exhaustion, pain, and something fiercer, pride. She had fought, not for land, not for pride, for something better, for loyalty, for life. The sun rose higher, painting the rocks gold and blood red. The smoke from her burned cabin drifted higher into the clear sky. Chayton touched her shoulder, a rare gesture of familiarity. "Come, we leave." Poker Alice nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She wasn't running anymore. She was walking forward through fire into something new. As she gathered her things and turned to follow the warriors into the rising sun, she didn't look back. The past was ashes. The future, whatever it was, would be written in fire and dust. The wind stirred the ashes where Poker Alice's cabin once stood. Nothing remained but blackened beams and shattered glass, half buried in the churned-up dust. She watched the smoke trail thin into the wide blue sky, a last whisper of a life she had outgrown. The warriors moved around her, gathering their wounded, tending to horses, speaking in low voices. No one rushed. They had learned patience in a land that showed no mercy. Every movement was deliberate, practiced as if the earth itself might punish them for carelessness. Chayton knelt beside Taza, checking his brother's wounds with gentle hands. The younger man breathed easier now, his fever broken. The worst of the danger passed. Poker Alice sat cross-legged nearby, cleaning her rifle with slow, methodical care, the repetitive motion grounding her against the whirlwind inside her chest. Chayton glanced up, his eyes catching hers across the distance. In that look, there was no judgment, no pity, only acknowledgement. She had fought, she had stood, she had bled for them. Now she belonged to no one. And yet somehow she belonged here. The sun slid lower, gilding the rocks with molten light. In the fading warmth, the warriors prepared to move again. They would not linger where death had walked. Poker Alice understood that now deep in her bones. Chayton approached, his footsteps soft in the dust. "You ride with us," he said, not as a question, but as a truth already decided. Poker Alice nodded, feeling the weight of it settle into her shoulders and lift her heart at the same time. She strapped her rifle across her back, rising to stand beside him. The group set out as twilight deepened. Riding in loose formation across the broken land, the horses' hooves made no sound against the hard earth. Shadows stretched long across the valley, swallowing the wounds and scars of the battlefield behind them. They rode until the stars pricked the sky cold and distant. The world shrank to the sound of breathing, the creak of leather, the soft jingle of bridles. At a small spring hidden by scrub, they made camp. Fires were forbidden, too dangerous with angry men still hunting the horizon. So they ate cold and silent, wrapped in cloaks against the gathering chill. Poker Alice sat a little apart, gazing at the stars. They burned fierce and white, scattered like spilled salt across the heavens. She remembered sitting by her cabin once, wishing on stars that never answered. Now she needed no wishes, only will. Chayton joined her, sinking to his haunches with the easy grace of a man born to the wild. "You choose hard road," he said after a while, voice low. Poker Alice smiled faintly. "Ain't no other kind worth walking." He grunted approval, then studied her with a solemnity that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "Tomorrow we go deeper into mountains, hard country, safe country. I'll keep up," she said, fiercer than she intended. His mouth twitched almost a smile. "You will." They sat in silence after that, the stars turning slowly overhead, the night breathing around them. When sleep finally claimed Poker Alice, it was not the thin, haunted sleep of fear. It was deep and dreamless, anchored in the knowledge that she had chosen her path with open eyes. Morning broke hard and fast. A scout returned, breathless, warning of riders on the horizon, not settlers, but soldiers from the nearest fort. Word of the fight had traveled faster than any of them had expected. There was no time for careful retreat. The warriors saddled up swift and sure. Poker Alice tightened the straps on her horse, checking her rifle, adrenaline sharpening every sense. Chayton rode to her side. "You ride close. You see chance you run." She shook her head. "I'm done running from cowards." He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, a warrior Unk-s salute. The soldiers crested the ridge, banners snapping in the wind, rifles gleaming under the hard morning sun. They formed a line across the valley mouth, cutting off the easiest escape. Poker Alice felt the old familiar fear rise, a cold knot twisting her gut, but she forced it down. Fear had ruled her once, no more. Chayton signal sharp and crisp. His warriors spread out, moving low and fast across the rocks, becoming part of the land itself. Poker Alice followed, keeping her body low, heart hammering in her ears. The soldiers called for surrender, their voices harsh and commanding. Bart and Clay riding at their side pointed directly at her, shouting. "There she is, traitor. String her up with the rest." Chayton gave her a glance questioning, almost apologetic. Poker Alice raised her rifle and answered with fire. The first soldier jerked backward, screaming, his rifle clattering from his hands. The line wavered. The warrior struck then, swift and brutal, using rocks and gullies to their advantage. Gunfire roared, smoke filling the valley. Poker Alice moved with them, every sense honed sharp as a blade. She fired, reloaded, moved, fired again, always staying close to cover, always keeping Taza and the others in her sight. She caught a glimpse of Bart Clay trying to rally the soldiers, his face red and twisted with rage. She set her sights on him, breathing slow and even. When she fired, it wasn't hate that guided her hand. It was justice. Clay screamed as her bullet shattered his shoulder, knocking him from his horse. He writhed in the dust. His cries lost in the chaos. The soldiers' line broke under the pressure, scattering in panic. Some fled, others threw down their weapons and raised shaking hands. The battle ended in a wild, breathless silence. Poker Alice staggered to her feet, smoke stinging her eyes, muscles aching from strain. Chayton stood nearby, blood seeping from a shallow graze across his ribs, but alive. His warriors gathered around him, battered but triumphant. Taza limped to Poker Alice's side, leaning heavily on a staff. "You fight like spirit woman," he said, voice thick with admiration. Poker Alice smiled through the pain, just stubborn. The surviving soldiers were rounded up, stripped of weapons, and sent back toward the fort on foot. A hard lesson carved into their pride. The warriors would move again deeper into the wilderness where no army dared follow. But for now they had won a breath of freedom. As the sun climbed higher, Poker Alice climbed a ridge overlooking the battlefield. Below her, smoke curled lazily into the bright sky. The valley stretched wide and broken, scarred by fire and blood, but still standing just like her. Chayton joined her silent. Together they watched the land heal itself, slow and stubborn as all wild things must. "You have name with us now," Chayton said at last. "Kiona stands for brown hills, strong, steady." Poker Alice felt her throat tighten. She had no words, but she nodded, accepting it with the solemnity it deserved. The wind picked up, tugging at her hair, carrying away the last ashes of her old life. She didn't know what waited ahead. Hardship, hunger, maybe death, but she knew she would meet it standing tall. Out here, survival was the only law, and Poker Alice Kiona now had proven herself worthy. As the warriors mounted and rode into the heart of the wild land, Poker Alice turned her horse and followed, her rifle across her back, her heart fierce and free. The dust swallowed their trail behind them, erasing the past. Only the future lay ahead, raw, untamed, and waiting.